Hello and welcome to the Comics Pals Book Club. I am your host, Sean, joined by all the pals. I have Marco,
Hello.
Tyler,
I'm sort of here. Yeah.
and Kale.
What's up, hot dogs?
We're here to talk about Flashpoint. In honor of the Flash movie being released, we thought we would come and talk to you guys about, well, we didn't think it, frankly. Our patrons voted it. Our patrons voted for this book. It makes sense. It is a tie-in, sort of loosely, to the movie that we will be seeing shortly. So we will be talking about Flashpoint by Jeff Johns, with art by Andy Kubert, inks by Sandra Hope, and Jesse Delperdan, colors by Alex Sinclair, and letters by Nick Napolitano. Now, I don't know where you guys were circa 2011 when this book came out, but I was a pretty fresh new DC reader. I think by the standard of the amount of time that people generally read comics, I was only reading DC for like 3 years, so I didn't really know much. And the only thing I really knew about the Flash was that he was fast, and there were a few of them, but I didn't really know who was who. I couldn't have told you the difference between Wally and Barry. So when Barry came back in Flashpoint, I was like, oh, okay, whatever. A fast guy, another fast guy. And I had no connection to the character. So by the time Flashpoint rolled around in summer of 2011, I can assure you that I did not care. But Flashpoint is a pretty important book. In several ways, actually. It serves several functions. It was DC's summer event in 2011. It serves as the culmination of Jeff Johns' run on The Flash that started in 2009 with Flash Rebirth and continued in Flash Volume 3 from 2010. And it's the end of the post-crisis DC universe and the lead into the New 52. So this book was doing a lot, and it had a lot of ground to cover in just 5 issues. So speaking of covering ground, we're going to jump right into it. I want to hear from you guys, especially Kale and Tyler, who I know were more connected at the time, what your feelings were going into Flashpoint. Kale, start me out.
Yeah, very opposite of you. I was deep in my comics history at that point. I started reading regularly in middle school, which would have been early 2000s. So, by the time I got here, I was, well versed in the Flashes and the Flash history. And there used to be and it might still be around. There used to be a website called hyperborea.org, which was like a compendium of every Flash and every character and cool Flash wallpapers and stuff. And it was an early internet Wikipedia for the Flash, and I would study that thing. It was rad. So I was in college when Flashpoint came around, and I hated it. I didn't like the story. I didn't like what the rumors were leading us to, because I like the world I lived in. What are we changing it for?
Right.
So that's the basis of my history. I have a lot of character issues with the story itself, but we can get into that as we progress.
For me, and again, apologies for my voice here, but this would have been right after I graduated high school, so I was really into completionist kind of stuff. I wanted to read every single issue of whatever I wanted. So when Flashpoint came out and they were like, "Hey, all the books are stopping. We're gonna relaunch this Flashpoint event with all these other kind of maybe 2 or 3 issue miniseries and stuff." I was really into the idea of it. I remember, and honestly, rereading this, I did have trouble kind of separating that in my head, because reading this as a whole just feels very incomplete compared to what I know or what I remember. Um, so I remember it was hit or miss for me, really. I thought uh, you know, the main Flashpoint story I thought was kind of hollow. I remember feeling where it was just kind of running through stuff too quickly, and you couldn't really get your footing at all. And I know this sounds like a flash pun, but I don't really mean it to be. Um, but I remember there being a lot of good stuff within that, like the Thomas Wayne book, the Deathstroke pirate book was pretty good too, from what I remembered. And I know, Sean, sorry,
Pirates
triggered you
yeah.
there. But yeah, so reading this like in and of itself, it was very interesting for me, um, as this reread, because I haven't read this since it first came out. But yeah, this was kind of like in my real, like, I'm going to spend way too much money on this hobby phase of my collecting. So yeah.
Marco, and you have no familiarity with this, do you?
No, only the stuff that came right out of this, which is 2011. I jumped onto comics into New 52, so it's interesting to hear the sort of reservations for the New World, because I started in that New 52 era, and that to me was just like so much fun, and so it's an interesting take.
Yeah, I think we can spend a little bit of time talking about that. I remember having a lot of reservation. I felt like, hey, I just started reading DC. Why is it just ending? This is ridiculous. And I didn't know from that. I didn't know that DC would just kind of do this, although there had been a long stretch of time between post Crisis on Infinite Earths, DC, and that was 20 something years. It was like 25 years. So this was a shock to the system for a lot of people, especially those who are around the ages of Kale, myself, and Tyler, who are a little bit younger and just probably finding our footing like I was. Even though Kale says he was well versed, like, even then, Kale only got to read these stories for what, under a decade?
Yeah.
Before the relaunch. So
yeah,
that's a little scary. And I know I had trepidation about this story because I didn't care about the Flash. Now, one of the interesting things about this book is that it's a 5-issue story that unfolds over 3 months. It unfolded over June, July, and August. Or excuse me, 4 months, because it started in May. So it didn't take up too much of DC's time. And they stopped the whole publication line, as someone mentioned earlier, and they put out, short mini series, tie-in books to the main event itself. But I feel, and we can start right out of the gate with this, I feel like this is a book that could have used a little bit more time. A couple more issues, maybe, and a little more room to breathe.
I'd go further and say this book could have been a good replacement to like the 52 or Brightest Day, honestly. Like the weekly book sort of thing for a year. Like, not that I really want to live in this world for a year, but write it to be meant that way. You know what I mean? Yeah.
I think to that, like, wanting to exist, I would have liked to have existed in this world because it would have given it more stakes. Like, we only get to see it really during these 5 issues, and then that's kind of it. And you have to go to those tie-ins to really try to explore more. And so as I was reading this, I'm like, oh, okay, there's a lot of like context that is somewhat missing here. So I actually went back to read a few of the just solo series, and that helped to fill in the blanks. But I think I think having had even some of those be part of the main story, make this like 12 issues or something, I think that would benefit, or at least more than 5, I think would benefit the overall narrative. It would just give you more context, more information, but I think also it would resonate more emotionally with some of the characters that get lost, some of the deaths, and even some of the consequences that come out of this.
So Flashpoint is a story that is, I mean, pretty much everyone kind of knows the basics of the story, right? Like everybody knows that this is a story about, you know, a mistake that Barry made that redid reality. And if it pretty much at the middle of it is a war between Wonder Woman and Aquaman, who in this alternate universe hate each other and have a very personal vendetta. And they are utilizing their armies to go to war, and it's a war that very likely will end the world. And on top of that, this world does not have the traditional host of superheroes. It is a very reduced cast of characters across the board, and a lot of the more powerful characters that we're familiar with are actually off the table. So, as an example, the most powerful, or not the most powerful, but the most popular superhero is Cyborg in this world. And Batman is an urban legend. He's there, but you know, they're not all the way sure. Like, is this even a guy? Like, what, you know, what's going on with this? And that's really where things start. You know, Barry finds himself in this new world. He knows that something's wrong, but his mother is there. His mother being alive sort of disarms him from focusing too much on the problem at hand. But he quickly realizes that he needs to do something to change this world because the world that he used to live in is slipping away from him. And this ain't right. I like that as a baseline table setting. I have no issue with that. I think the world that Jeff Johns created is interesting enough, and the concept is interesting enough that it's been utilized multiple times in different adaptations. In the Flash television show, the Flashpoint animated film where they recreated it. We got the Flashpoint Beyond sequel. The Flash movie is based loosely on this. So Flashpoint has been utilized a lot of times across the board, and every time it's that same basic premise. However, this book, I'm not sure utilizes that premise better than it's been used elsewhere, if that makes sense.
Shoot, I think I haven't, you know, we haven't seen the movie yet, but I think the premise of the movie sounds even better. I don't like the fact that we don't discover that Barry is the one that causes this until the end. I think the weight of that is rife for emotional stakes. That is just it's a MacGuffin. Is that the right term? It's just
really.
it's like a mystery, really, as to
Yeah.
why.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Why, you know, like why the world is like this. And it's like, oh, it's Barry. Like, I understand you want a twist, but I feel like knowing that he caused it would be better in my opinion. But
Yeah, and it goes into my big problem with Barry as he's come back at this point in you know the history. So after his death in Crisis on Infinite Earths, no one was ever supposed to bring Barry back. He was Jean Grey. He was supposed to be untouchable.
Yep.
And that was like the gold standard for, you know, 20 some odd years. So when Jeff Johns brings him back, all of a sudden he's got this complex, and not even complex, he's got this new revitalized origin about his parents being, you know, split up, his dad being framed for his mother's murder, and you know it's all fraught with his parental relationships. And I hate that, because to me the Flash was always that one person that was like, it was an accident and he's a good guy, so he does this. And it just, like, you know, it just added more to this pile of superheroes with parent issues, and oh, my parents are gone and now I have to save the world. And Flashpoint like made that 100 times worse for me. And now every single iteration of Flashpoint is like rubbing my face in it.
That's interesting, because it's worth pointing out that, you know, Kale's 100% right. Barry was supposed to be off the table forever. That was the idea. However, Dan Didio actually spilled tea on this recently. He talked about the fact that that plan or that edict changed when he got into power. Obviously, Jeanette Kahn was gone, and he was like, well, the movies want to be using Barry. That's the upcoming plan. The upcoming plan was for Barry Allen to be within the movie franchises for DC films. And there was no way that they were going to let the comic book Flash be Wally while the film and animated and everything else was Barry. So they broke the rule and brought Barry back. However, Wally, and Kale, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but this is what I have learned. Wally was molded over years to kind of represent Barry in a way, to kind of be like Barry. And he kind of became Barry in some ways.
Well, he sort of became better than Barry.
Right.
In that he became a complex, layered character in the way that Barry never really got the chance to.
Right.
You know,
right.
Like Barry did some cool stuff, you know. He did go to the future, and he, you know, got to mess with the Legion, and he found Iris in the future somehow, and all that, you know, Reverse Flash stuff is all real cool and good. But he was still your average white guy superhero, you know. So then Wally takes over, and it's your real first sidekick stepping up into the role, you know, like in perpetuity.
Yeah.
And so, you know, this is where you get Mark Waid's run, and Morrison and Millar and Miller and even Jeff Johns. And so Wally, you know, had 20 years, almost 20 years more history than Barry did.
Yeah. I think that's a point worth making. Oh, sorry, Tyler. Go ahead.
And Wally was also the Flash in the Justice League cartoon. So, like, for kids growing up, like, Wally was my Flash. I didn't know about Barry really growing up.
So I guess just to clear up some confusion on my end, was he brought back for this event in particular, or was that stuff? Because this is also coming out of Rebirth stuff, right?
No, this is Rebirth is almost a decade down the line. This is just regular old DC. This is post Crisis on Infinite Earths DC.
Yep. Flash Rebirth happened right before this.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And Flash Rebirth happened in 2009, and that was the beginning of the bringing of Barry back for the New 52, for the movies and things like that. So like I said earlier, Flashpoint has a lot of responsibilities. And I think when you read it, to bring it back to the book, I think you can feel the gears kind of turning at times. And that is a problem with it. This is one of the events that I think is the greatest example of editorial and, you know, whatever else, the powers that be having a lot of different needs that they need to meet and burying an event in those needs. Because when you read Blackest Night, which is Jeff Johns' event directly prior to this, that event feels it feels more like it has the things that you expect from a Jeff Johns book. Really gripping dialogue, great character work, big moments, which I think this book has big moments, and I think this book soars really high when it does, and I think the evidence of that is in how many times some of these moments have been recreated, especially given how young this book is relative to a lot of other things. But it feels like it's weighed down by a lot of the stuff that that Jeff Johns was asked to do. Let's start with some of the early beats, like we said earlier. You know, quickly we're introduced to this new world. Quickly, you know, Barry wakes up and he's like, "Oh, I got to go be the Flash," and he tries to run and he falls down the stairs, which I thought was a good moment. Jeff letting us know that something is wrong through that. Letting us further know that something is wrong by Barry's mom being alive, which only hits you if you know the character already. That's something that didn't work for me at all the first time around and worked for me more now.
Okay. That did not work for me. I'm just like, okay. Sure. This is a lot of the first issue and a lot of the setup was just I'm accepting fact. I'm not.
Right.
It is not like being turned on its head.
Yeah.
Yeah, it still didn't work for me here for the same reason it didn't work for me back then. The mother stuff, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay, because I was about to say the only twist for me was when Bruce turned out to be Thomas, and then I'm like, whoa, we're someplace else. Hold on a second.
Yeah, we get introduced to a more violent Batman here early on, who seems to have more questionable morals, if you will, about superheroics than the Batman we're used to. You know, and this is such a great example of Jeff Johns' skill, where we see a kind of a normal thing, right? Batman just throwing someone off a roof, right? Like that sounds crazy, but how many times have we not seen him do that and then save the person, right? Like he's always planning to save him. Just a little scare tactic. But in this issue, you know, John subverts our expectation by Cyborg being there to save her. If it wasn't for him, she'd be dead. So I thought that was a great way to introduce this new Batman. And then, as Marco illustrated, flip us by revealing that it's actually Thomas Wayne.
That was a cool moment. It was a good beat. It was also a good way to introduce Cyborg as like I feel like that pickup would have been either Flash or Superman, you know? And so like I was like, oh, okay, he's involved to some degree, right. And he's also like positioned higher somehow.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Kale, as a Teen Titans guy at the time, what did seeing Cyborg just suddenly have a starring role without any other Titans feel like? Because I remember when this came out, I was like, oh, Cyborg, interesting choice there.
For me, not a lot.
No, you didn't smell anything weird. Like, oh, why? There's like no question. There was like, all right, it's just Cyborg.
Well, you know, in events and Elseworld things like this, you know, and we see it, you know, further on in Flashpoint, these guys come out of the woodworks, you know, and now, you know, now knowing what I know, it's them trying to elevate Cyborg into the Justice League.
Right.
Spoilers.
Oh.
But, you know, the his character in previously was in the Teen Titans, and I think it was Brad Meltzer's Justice League run, which sort of happens post Infinite Crisis. They specifically mentioned that Cyborg, you know, has been with the Teen Titans. He's a grown up. He's well earned his spot as much as, you know, Nightwing has on the Justice League if he wants it. So there must have been talks for Cyborg moving up, especially with the death of Martian Manhunter right around, you know, this same time as well.
So we meet these characters, Cyborg and Batman, but it is immediate that we're introduced to what basically amounts to the resistance in this world, the heroes and, you know, villains who don't want the world to end, to the war between Wonder Woman and Aquaman. And, you know, it's kind of like, hey, if Batman's involved, we'll be there. Otherwise, we aren't down for this. That whole sequence is one of the examples, and again, it rears its head very, very early, where I feel this book needed more room to breathe and where the tie-ins help. Because this is a ton of different characters who, if you're, you know, most people who read events, right? Events always outsell other books. Why? Because people are drawn to it. They don't necessarily know anything else. They're just coming for the event. So somebody like me, especially at that time, who's 3 years deep into reading DC, I can't tell you at that time, if I'm being honest, I can only name one of these characters at that time, and that's Captain Cold. Out of everybody in this double page spread that I'm holding up right now, if you're watching this, I can only recognize Captain Cold. And that's not great, but it's even worse because when you read through this, Johns is doing so much to try to give these characters recognizable, personalities and make you kind of care about them, it feels like it's too much. And the dialogue in the scenes reflects that, because every line has too much responsibility.
I even looked up some of the characters, like Blackout, as I'm reading this for the show.
Yeah.
Blackout, the guy who has the I believe they're called shiesties now. Am I right about that? The ski mask.
Ski mask.
Yeah. I looked at him I'm like, oh, I remember he had like a mini series, something like that. And I went on like Comic Vine, and looked at the character, and it's like, oh, the Comic Vine wiki wasn't even up to date. Like they just stopped after his first issue.
Right.
It was a little. I usually come into these expecting not to know these people, so I'm like, okay, fine, whatever. Like the fact that I knew Sandman and I knew, I'm blanking on his name. Look at that shit. Like the level of like deep cut some of these guys are is just not shade. And I think a lot of these tie-ins should have been part of the main story, because they explain so much and give so much context, and frankly, some of them were a lot of fun. The ones in particular, like Wonder Woman and the Furies, where it goes through like how this started, why Aquaman and Wonder Woman even having the war in the first place. Like you're just thrown into this environment and you're like expected to just accept a lot of that. And fine, you can do that, but I'm also somebody who likes to have a lot of context for these things. And so more so when you're fresh into these events, and that would have been super helpful. The Outsider book as well would have been really helpful, because then you start to understand like different factions and then how these guys play into that, why there even was a war and the catalyst involved. So I think that was probably one of the detriments of this book being so short, was that if you're not reading those tie-ins, then you're maybe lost for context, and then you don't even know where to start for some of these, because you don't know how some of them ultimately tie into the book and whether or not they're just kind of fluff.
And I think that's one of the issues of the book too, is stakes. Even Barry deals with it in the book. It's like, all right, where do we want our stakes to be? Do we want to be with Barry in erasing this world, or saving it? Because even he flip flops back and forth a bit. And Thomas has to like correct him, like, no, erase this world, get back to the other one. So it's like you introduce all these characters and these like, and you hint at dynamics and you hint at backstory. But like, do I care? You're not really. I'm not sure you're making me care in this book by itself.
Should I know to care is the other thing, right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
because if I wanted to go back to some of these, I'm like, oh, but who would I actually need to, like? Do I really need to read this Gorilla Grodd book? It's a good title, but like
They show up at the very last minute in a panel,
and
and
it's
I was
like,
wait, what? Why? That was
why did I read that 22-page book?
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing too is, you've got to remember this came out in a 4-month span that I think was even like, if you think about it, as they were like merging the universes or whatever, Justice League was the first book that came out, as I recall, and it came out while Flashpoint was still happening.
No way.
So
I believe you're right. Yeah, I believe you're right.
So the end of Flashpoint at best led right into Justice League if you went to the shop and picked it up. But, at the end, you're still holding a book with the Flash on the cover, right? Like, even if you went to the store, what are the stakes?
Right. Well, I mean, even at the end of it, right? Like, it doesn't even help to lead into the Justice League. Like now that you guys are saying that, like now the end doesn't make as much. It doesn't have enough power, or as much power, to really lead into the New 52. If this was supposed to be the launch point.
I just fact checked it. Issue 5 came out the same day as Justice League #1. So New 52 launched the same day Flashpoint came out, and we had already gotten solicitations and like those previews catalogs with all the new #1s and all that at that point. So yeah, the ball was already rolling.
So the other thing with these characters is like we know from interviewing Jeff that he loves like D-list characters, and he's putting that on full display in this. I think most of the time you would take most of the time a writer would, in my mind, for an event like this, take characters we know and flip them. What he did with Batman, what he does with Wonder Woman and Aquaman is what we would see for a lot of characters. And that would solve the problem of us saying, A, who are they? And B, why do I care about them? You know, if Zatanna's on the page or if Constantine's there or, you know, other people, right? Then we go, okay, well, I don't know what's going on, but I know how, you know, Starfire and Nightwing feel about each other. But then Jeff Johns flips it and says, well, you think you know how they feel about each other, but what about this? And that can be some of the intrigue. And that's lacking. So I did have a bit of a problem with that as well. These characters end up feeling sort of like fodder and basically irrelevant because we don't care about them. And you never really do. The only one I sort of cared for was Element Woman down the line and the Shazam kids.
And even the Shazam kids were a lot.
Yeah. Very Alan Moore ending to the Shazam Kid storyline in Flashpoint.
Did they? Was the thing that they would all become Shazam versus
Yeah.
each individual?
Oh, yeah.
They became
Yep.
Captain Thunder, which I think
Yeah.
is an
Right.
alternate. There is an established lore that it's an alternate universe Shazam. I believe. Shazam's backstory is convoluted.
Well, that makes sense because Mazis is Shazam backwards from the New 52,
Yeah.
the Alexander Luthor or whatever, right? Isn't that him? So he's a Shazam from another universe as well, and there's a different activation clause for him. So I think that's kind of interesting.
That
Like they
tiger's
all
cool.
have, yeah, that was sick.
I like it better when he's in the suit. When he talks.
Fair enough. But the other thing that this issue suffers from is the fact that we don't breathe with it. And I'm going to keep going back to this problem. We don't get to see much of Barry just sitting with his mom. You know, he hasn't seen his mother in at least a year. I think the book tries to say that, or something I read suggested it's been a year since his mother died. So he hasn't seen his mother in a long time.
It's a year since he found out Thawne was the one who killed his mother.
Okay, thank you. Okay. A year since he found out. All right, cool. So he hasn't seen his mother in a long time. He sees her here. He's very happy, but that doesn't really go anywhere. It gets right into the superheroics. The heart of the book is really his relationship with his mother, and that takes a lot of a back seat. And I think that's a problem because the emotional core is not really center stage. But I guess how can you deal with that at the same time? Do we really want a million scenes of Barry strolling in the park with his mom?
I mean,
No.
I'd read that book.
I think I would too, and I think Jeff Johns would write the heck out of it. I think decompressing this would have helped a lot.
To your point, like, you know, we talked to Jeff about you know, the little character moments. For example, in the one that comes to mind immediately is the robot book. Help me.
Oh, Junkyard Joe.
Junkyard Joe. Android Andy, why can't I find this? You know, he takes the he uses the camera in his panel descriptions to give little, you know, extra reactions so that we can see what the characters are saying or aren't saying, you know, to see reactions and motives and things like that. You get very little of that in Flashpoint. And what you do get, it really feels like Jeff has to work for it.
Yeah, I know what you mean. And again, it's just like when you only have 5 issues, page and panel space is limited.
Yeah.
And so when you've heard a writer explain their process and you know the hallmarks to look for, and you read a book and you see that they're not there, that they're minimally, there's probably a reason for that.
Like
Mhm.
Hal dies in this off screen, and Barry gets a panel to react.
Right.
It's his best friend. Like it would be so
Yeah.
much more than that.
A relationship very well explored in Blackest Night.
Yeah.
Yep.
So before we move too far forward, I do want to talk a little bit more about Thomas Wayne's Batman. Very iconic look and design, the red eyes, the different cowl, cape and cowl. I despised this turn when I first read this. At the time, I was like, wait a second, Thomas Wayne owns casinos. Thomas Wayne is down to like kill people. I don't want this. I couldn't grasp that. I couldn't get with that. My opinion has changed a lot since then. Part of that is because we've seen the character come around more, and I really liked what Tom King did with this version of Thomas in Batman. I also really like Flashpoint Beyond's version of the character, which came out last year. And so my opinion of this version of Thomas has changed. I really, really, really like the character. And I like him here. He's the only person who's complicated. It feels like he's the one with the emotional twist and turn. It feels like his feelings are the feelings that the book turns on. The other characters won't help unless Batman's involved. At first, Batman doesn't care about this at all. And he's like, hey, I don't know who you are. You seem crazy, to the Flash, and I want nothing to do with this. It's not really until he mentions Bruce Wayne. And the fact that in Barry's timeline, it's Bruce that lives and Thomas that dies, where Thomas's mind changes and he's more willing to help with this. He's not fully convinced, but he's willing. He thinks there might be something to this madness. That's where the intrigue comes from. Whenever Thomas straps Flash up to that chair and shocks him, that moment is insane. It's iconic, but it's really Batman's willingness to help that leads to that.
It's also that's how you know Thomas Wayne's a good Batman, when he manages to take all the spotlight for himself, just like a real Batman would in any event.
Yeah.
So, worked out.
Yeah, I think that would have been a critique, is that when he gets involved, it feels like it becomes a Batman book a little bit. Like he becomes a lot of, like, yes, this is surrounding his Barry's story, but he becomes that driving force for a lot of what ends up happening in the end game, and even like parts in the middle. Like, yeah, he helps him get his powers back, but that's all in part because Batman's there. Otherwise, we wouldn't even be having that part of the conversation. So I think, I don't know, I had mixed feelings on Batman as a character. I think the violent aspect, cool, like, yeah, he's different in that way, but I don't know that I even cared for, go give this back to Bruce, and like it didn't necessarily work for me. I didn't have that emotional connection with him.
I'll return to my thoughts on that piece later on, but go ahead, Gil.
I guess I'm mostly curious. Had you read the Sean? Had you read the Batman stuff surrounding Thomas back then in Flashpoint?
The tie-ins.
Yeah, the
no.
Batman origin. Oh, okay.
No, because I really, really did not like this character.
Yeah, they're the one good thing that came out of this book.
And that was Brian Azzarello, was it not? I think it was.
Oh, I don't know. Was it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I believe
it's very
so,
good.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I that's something that I wish I had gone back and read for this. I probably will take the time to do that now, but yeah, I have never read that.
I think you will really enjoy it. Yeah.
It might be Riso on art too, if I'm mistaken.
Yes, I think that's correct.
Okay, I won't spoil the twist of that book.
I mean,
I almost just did too, actually.
it wouldn't bother me. I mean, that's well over a decade old at this point.
Well, listen, we'll save you.
Fair enough. Yeah. So issue 2 really continues things. We see a lot more, characters in different ways than we're used to. Deathstroke's a pirate.
That was cool.
Wonder Woman uses the lasso of truth on Steve Trevor. I was not really a fan of the redesign for Wonder Woman here.
With the
Didn't work
helmet,
for me. Yeah.
I dug that. It made her feel more like a warrior. She's like coming in, going into battle. But you don't even get to see her do too much in the main series.
Yeah, I don't know. It was this, and then right into the new 52 Wonder Woman design, which I also disliked. So it's just like, oh my goodness, please, for the love of goodness. That's another thing that we should talk about. This book serves it's the last story of the DC universe as we knew it at the time. So as much as it's a Flash book, it's also the finale. The fact that the finale of the DC universe features very, very, very precious little of the characters that people care about, and none except the Flash of them in the way we're used to, is very disappointing.
And it's made even worse by the fact that you have to be following 50 different tie-ins if you want your character.
Sure.
If you want to know what's going on with Aquaman and Wonder Woman, you've got to be following their books.
I think now that you frame it that way, this feels, I think someone said it earlier, but like a bit hollow in that case. Like the stakes aren't worth this cataclysmic end to the DC universe. The players involved, like, yeah, they're alternate versions, or but they don't have these big, like, this is the kind of stuff that you'll see like Spectre come out or something. Like if the whole DC universe is about to change or something, like my man's coming out and he's spilling whatever prophecies. Constantine usually is involved in these kind of things, and so I think to that end, yeah, this feels a bit flatter.
Yeah, especially as a sort of a swan song. You would think you would get to see Superman's final heroic act. You would get to see Wonder Woman in all her glory, and that's not what we get. We actually get, I don't mind Project Superman as a concept. I was kind of into it, but you get Wonder Woman and Aquaman arguably at their worst. So if you're a fan of one of those characters, like, even if you read the tie-in, they're still not the version you know and love, and they don't even feel like that character. So that's frustrating. And there's no space for nuance. There's no room for Jeff Johns to do interesting things with these characters and say, well, yeah, Wonder Woman sucks, but here's that kernel of the character that you know and love, and here's why she's so different, and here's why you should care about her war with Aquaman. That's not here. And I don't care who wrote it otherwise. I want to read it from Jeff Johns.
It's a good point, Sean, because like there really was no send-off to pre-New 52. We still had Dick Grayson as Batman at that point.
Yep.
Superman was walking around the country.
Oh God,
I think that might have been the last run before they rebooted.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of wild.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kel.
Well, another thing that's so disappointing about it is, Johns wrote Infinite Crisis, and there's not like a lot of nuance in that, but it deals with a lot. And even, as I recall, even reading those 8 issues, which were jam-packed of stuff, you still got a ton. But here it's like it feels like very broad strokes to just shove you into the next thing.
I think it's because the fact that they had to do this for the whole line. Like the whole line needed to have books.
Yeah.
So the main series feels like a weird backdoor pilot for a whole bunch of minis.
Mhm.
I have a conspiracy theory. Probably never know the truth of this. I wonder if this concept, the Flashpoint concept, was either A, not actually intended to be an event, like when originally conceived by Jeff, or B, was conceived as an event, but an event similar to Blackest Night, not an event that was going to end DC. Because if you actually look at the content of the book, there's no real reason why we go into the New 52.
Right.
Like it's just what it is.
Yep.
The fact that this is supposed to be the catalyst does not feel like that at all. Like
But we
I
see Pandora.
sorry,
Yeah, do you know about Pandora, Marco?
from the Nifty 2 stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
She's
Yeah,
in
yeah,
this
yeah.
in that double page spread, and it was like
Wait,
a
she
big.
is she in here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or at the end?
Yeah, at the end.
Yeah.
That's her. She's like this big mystery character. Like, oh, who's that? Oh, she caused the New 52.
She's been in every book since the beginning.
And then what does Dr. Manhattan just kill her eventually? Like,
Something like that. I mean, later on,
Yeah.
it's revealed that Dr. Manhattan was the reason why
Yeah.
we went into the New 52.
Didn't the Batman Who Laughs kill her or something?
I still remember her being
Wasn't that part of Metal?
a wet fart of a character.
Yeah.
You might be right too, Kill. I don't actually remember, but she got jobbed out. Let's talk art because we haven't talked about Kubert's art. Andy Kubert's art is what I consider to be DC house style of this time period. There are a lot of books that look similar to this. I think Kubert's art is what I think about when I think about DC in these years. Maybe that's also got something to do with the fact that he contributed to Morrison's legendary Batman run around the same time. But I think about Kubert. So I really like the Kubert art here. I think especially with the colors which come from Sinclair. I think that the art is great. I think it pops. I really can't express enough how smart of a decision it was to give this Batman red eyes. So smart to me.
Yeah.
Agreed. This art is solid, and I think I'm a fan of the Kuberts at large. So I think getting to see them is always a joy, and this fits into a lot of what ends up being some of the later, like New 52 era stuff. Like I can see some of the beginnings of Capullo with like the inks with the lines and stuff. I think a lot of that scratchiness comes off here, not to the same degree as some of the later artists, but I think a lot of that is being like this is the grounding, this is the ground floor for the art that is forthcoming. It's just good stuff.
It's funny how you mentioned that Kubert reminds you of like DC of the time. For me, it's the opposite. Kubert reminds me of Marvel at the time. When I think of Kubert, I think of Marvel, 100%.
What was Kubert doing at Marvel at the time?
Kubert had done X-Men in the 90s into 2000s, and he's done Conan. He did, Cable. He did G.I. Joe. He did Wolverine.
Ultimate
I remember
X-Men too,
Wolverine is the one I remember reading more of that time.
The Wolverine origin.
Yeah. And that
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like that was like one of my entry books, surprisingly, into comics properly. So once I read this again, I totally forgot Kubert was the artist of this book, to be honest. Jumping into it, I was like, oh hell yeah. This is what I like. I love Andy Kubert. One of my favorite artists. So it almost felt like a dirtier DC in my mind, which just fits perfectly for Flashpoint. Because it's a little scratchier, it's a little uglier. Like even Barry never looks as his suit's always ripped to shreds. He's a slab of pastrami after he gets electrocuted. Like, he never looks like, like classic DC. That hurts to do that voice. But it's cool to see Kubert in this because I think it leans into the story and the theme of the story.
It doesn't look as sculpted as the Jim Lee figures do
Exactly, yeah,
in the New 52. Which I think is interesting because Jim Lee felt more like what they wanted the house style to be at the time because of like Batman Hush. And so I want to say Alex and Claire worked with Lee a lot. So for me, the colors here feel more house style, and that's what sinks it into. There were moments where, especially at the end, but throughout the book, where I was like, oh, this could be Lee.
Okay.
I felt that too. Yeah, it felt a lot like New 52 Lee. Like Justice League, and then further on his Suicide Squad
Superman
stuff.
Unchained.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah.
Ivan Reese,
Yeah.
all those guys.
Yeah, exactly. That said, I felt sometimes like the bigger action set pieces, the scope of things was sometimes hard to really take in. And I didn't feel that the bigger action set pieces looked all that great. I kind of wished for more splashier, widescreen panels for some of this stuff. Some of these moments, I think, lose it when they're so tight, or feature so many characters, but you can't really tell who's doing what. I'm holding up a great example right now. That's just one panel, but it's like, who's doing what, who's fighting. This is the last time we're supposed to see a lot of these characters. I would have liked to have really been able to immerse myself a bit more in the battle that they're in. This is the last battle in DC. And I didn't get that feeling. So that would be my only real ding on the art.
I mean, the art suffers the same issue that the writing does. It's too compressed.
Yeah.
And it has to create moments that will basically live in other books. So there's not a ton of emotional weight to them either.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Like the Gorilla
like
Grodd
the
stuff. Like
yeah.
Okay.
Or
he pulls a
was
Gandalf, but like there's no context to it.
If I'm not mistaken, Aquaman kills Wonder Woman. And if you're reading that, that's an absolutely huge moment. But in this, it's like
it doesn't happen in the main book.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Marco, which minis did you read?
So I read the Flashpoint section here. I tell you. So the Furies, Wonder Woman and the Furies. I read Flashpoint, Deadman and the Flying Graysons, which not related at all, but excellent story. I had a lot of fun with that one.
I remember liking that one. Yeah.
I did Abin Sur, the Green Lantern. I only read the first 2 issues of that one though. Didn't read the Secret Seven stuff. There was like 2 more that I read. The first issue of Deathstroke and the Gorilla Grodd book.
So out of all of them, you skipped the one about the magic side of the DC universe. Wow.
Oh, Flashpoint. Flashpoint, the world of Flashpoint.
Oh, that was like a grab bag, right?
That I don't know, but that helped to like paint some of the picture of what the world governments were doing at the time, and they're like randomly Nazis in Brazil and stuff. Like, so a lot of this. Well,
not just a Flashpoint issue.
But a lot of them like helped to add a lot more context, and I think, yeah, I think a lot of that deserve to be in the book proper.
Yeah. Let's talk about the end here. Batman is down to team up and fight this war. If the Flash can't change history, then this could be the world that they're stuck with. And so they decide that they've got to fight for this world. And again, the decision is really up to Batman. If Batman says, I'm down, they can win. If he's not down, they're not going to win. So Batman, again, is the actor here, not the Flash. But he makes the choice to stick around and fight the good fight. They get into this battle. They rescue Superman, who's never seen the outside world before.
Bro needs to touch grass for real.
Never touched grass.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is what happens. This is what happens. I used to look like this when I was 15 years old.
You were
touching
white?
grass. Yes, that's a big secret about me.
Wow.
I'm transracial.
All right.
Anyway, yeah, so they rescue him and he, screws off. And we get the big battle that we talked about. And it's, at the center of it, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, their armies. It's really difficult to conjure up care about that aspect of it because there's just nothing to it. I really love Captain Thunder. The moment where he gets separated, where they all get separated by the Enchantress, I thought that was pretty cool. And then it just comes down to a fight between Flash and Reverse Flash, Professor Zoom. That stuff I liked, but once again, it's like,
Yo, that shit was weak. I don't know what you're talking about, man. That shit was weak. Like, it popped up, and like that was the fine, like the reveal where he all of a sudden he pops up at the end of issue 4. I was like, oh shit, we're gonna stuff's going down. All right, cool, I'm in. And then they like throw a few punches, and then it's not even him. Don't stop moving when you're in war, and he just gets stabbed by Thomas. Come on, okay, sure, yeah,
I like that.
All right.
You know why? I'll tell you why. Because Jeff Johns chooses to deliberately use a trope at the start of this fight, which is the trope of the villain chatterboxing. And he's so sure that he won that it doesn't matter because the Flash is his villain. All of this is about the Flash. Batman wouldn't kill. Who's going to kill him? Who can stop him but the Flash? It's the guy who's different. It's the guy who's not going to stand around and listen to this horseshit. The guy who's not a traditional hero just stabs him. That's what would happen if this version of Batman came across the Joker, Two-Face, whoever. I love that he does that.
Poked a hole right through my sails.
Wow. No, you guys aren't sold on that? You didn't like that?
Chaos.
Silent.
Kale looked like he was winding one up.
Yeah, you're right. But I think the Reverse Flash stuff, especially at the time, it really reeked of, the hero has to have this mirror villain that's gonna absolutely ruin his life. And it just we just come out of Green Lantern with the Sinestro Corps War, and all this stuff was happening. And this was the first phase of the Marvel stuff too. The films. So, you have your Thor and your Loki and your Captain America and the Red Skull and
Iron Man.
Iron Man and the Ironmonger. And it's just like it was a repetitive thing that was really, when you think about it, it makes absolute sense. The problem was that everyone was doing it. It was really coming to head here. Man of Steel and Zod. It was just, that might have been before this, after this. But it was just, it was so eh, mid, you know?
Not
Just
Kale,
like,
not Kale using a Gen Z term.
did I do it right?
You did, yeah. Congrats.
It felt wrong coming out, but yeah, it just didn't have the weight that a Yobard Thawne story should, because this is the Reverse Flash. This is it.
Wasn't Flash Rebirth a Eobard story as well?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it wasn't very good either.
Oh, actually, I remember loving it, honestly. But
No, well, and I mean, I've already explained my relationship to it, but it's the same
fair,
thing.
fair.
Let's talk about the final scene between Barry and his mother, because I kind of struggled with this one. So let's actually dive into it. He lands at her porch and he's like, "Mom," and she goes, "What are you wearing? What are you doing here? Did you hear the report on the news? They say this is the end." He says, "It is, Mom, and it's all because of me." And she says, "It's so hard to believe, Barry." He says, "I know, Mom. I changed the world for the worse. But there has to be a way I can save everyone, including you." His mother says, "Barry, if you stopped yourself," he says, "even if I wanted to go back in time and stop myself, I can't accurately travel to the past without a machine called the cosmic treadmill." She says, now she's the most brilliant mother on earth. I know we all love our mothers and everything else. We all think our mothers are the greatest people. She is a legit genius, because she says, "But you were drawn back to me when you started to break the time barrier, like a lightning rod. If you focus on yourself, wouldn't you be drawn to the right time?"
Man,
It's like when you you open the fridge, you're like, I can't find the ketchup, and then like she walks over and it's like, it's right here.
It just was one of those moments where it's like the character has the answer to every question possible. Something that she wouldn't know. How is she even accepting all this? She's like she's taking this extremely well. I wish the moment could have had more impact. I think it was sullied by the fact that they had to do so much, plot work, I guess. But her last lines of, "You have to let me go, Barry." He says, "I don't want to." She says, "Neither do I, but I'll be with your father. I'll be okay." That hit me. I felt that. He gets what every superhero who has the tragic backstory never gets, which is the moment with the person that he lost. He made a big mistake by changing everything to make himself happy, to get his mother back. Would Spider-Man not do the same thing? Would Batman not do the same? Would these characters, if they had the power to do it, not make the same choice? We get that answer a little later with Batman, where Batman says, "I would do the same thing and don't think I haven't thought about how to get that done."
Yeah, dude, that was cool.
But what human being alive would not choose to go back in time and undo their primal wounding? Like, forget about a superhero. What person? It's the easiest thing to connect with. We connect with these characters because of their tragedies and triumphs. Well, here's a guy who has the possibility to undo one of his tragedies. Of course he takes it.
It's a lot
I
of
get
trips to
it.
the past.
Yeah, I get it, and I felt it. I connected with it, and I understood through that conversation and his conversation with Bruce later what this story's really about, and I felt it.
I think if they had spent more time with the mother, I would have gotten to a place of that emotional resonance.
Yeah.
But this just, I 2 pages, like, and I'm supposed to feel something deeper about this loss, with this character who, frankly, I have not spent any time with. So I'm put in the situation, and I think your point is salient. Like, you're putting this onto this page, to this position to want to care, but it just didn't ring true with me. I didn't have I didn't feel the initial love. I'm just being told that they love each other.
Well, I also thought about the writer, and I thought about Jeff's real experience with grief and the death of his sister and how that has influenced him. And I thought, geez, what if Jeff was Barry? What if Jeff had the powers of the Flash? Wouldn't he make that choice? All those different things gave it some value to me, but I agree with you also that, the implications are there, but the groundwork isn't necessarily there.
I think much like the rest of this story, I think the emotional weight comes from Bruce and Bruce getting the letter, from Thomas. Because frankly, that's a character that we've lived with his entire publication history, since 1939, 80 million universes ago. We've lived with that character without his parents that long. Barry's parents were only just invented, so that, I think that's where we're supposed to really feel the emotional weight.
Dude, I lost it reading that this time around. And I think it does say a lot. You make a great point that the real emotionally resonant moment of this series lies with Batman. We discussed earlier how Batman is the primary actor in this series. He's the one who makes the relevant decisions, yada, yada, yada. So, of course, the emotional payoff lies with him. That moment is, to me, stellar. Because we know what it means to Batman. He didn't get to meet his father. And frankly, had he met his father, he wouldn't have even liked his father. At least not that version of his father. But getting a message of, I love you, from your dad. We don't get to read the whole message here. I think they show it to us later on, in a later series.
We get it in the button, maybe.
Yeah, which I loved. I love the button. I don't remember the context of the full message, but I think it's like, I'm proud of you. And, you can just imagine after everything that Bruce has been through, to be able to receive a message like that from his dad would mean the world.
Even absolutely hating this book, I went, all right, that's a good moment.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, that was a good part. Sean, did you ever read the Tom King run on Batman?
Yeah, I referenced it earlier. Yeah, I really loved.
Oh, you
Sorry?
liked his because it's a very different take on this character for the one that you're saying you love right now.
Yeah. So I didn't finish that, so I don't know where it ended up, but of what I remember,
Okay.
I thought it was awesome the way he was utilized. I think he was actually an antagonist. He was teamed up with Bane. And I thought all that was pretty cool. And I really liked him in Flashpoint Beyond as well.
They almost seem like opposites in my head, but I think the character is cool. I agree.
So, all in all, I think for me, Flashpoint is a seminal book for the Flash character. If you care about the Flash, it's probably a book you will have read. I see Kale and Tyler not loving what I'm saying.
I was just watching Kale's reaction. He gave a stank face there.
Well, go ahead.
I think they want it to be a seminal story. And I think had it not been the thing that ends the DC universe, it could have been.
Would have been a solid arc.
I will strangely say that having the skeleton of this as a story without the need to help relaunch an entire comic book universe, which is also sort of the plot of the movie, is getting me like, oh man, maybe the movie can do it better.
Dang. Come on,
maybe.
Tyler,
It's a big maybe. It's a big maybe. So.
I mean, if they didn't have a criminal fronting it, I completely agree with you, but
they might steal the show or steal or a bunch of other things.
by all accounts, Tyler, everything I've seen leads me to agree with that sentiment. I do believe it. And like I said at the top, I think the bones of this are very excellent. Um, Jeff Johns is a master of this, a big event storytelling, and we've seen success from him in this avenue many times before. So to me, the anomaly here about the quality of this book has more to do about everything around it and the constraints and editorial mandates and things like that than what Johns or Kubert or anybody else involved in this book actually were allowed to do or what they brought to the table. I think this is a book where the moments are not as good as the sum of its part, or the book is not as good as the sum of its parts, is what I'm trying to say. Does that make sense? Like, there are great moments that stand out and that clearly keep getting recreated and, all of that. But I don't think the overall package itself is representative of what you could have expected from a DC event at this time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other final thoughts? And I would recommend this to anybody who is excited about the movie and wants to see how it was done first.
I always heard this being like this huge point in the DC universe, and having read it, I think it's lost a bit of that sort of luster for me. I think it's a solid enough story to want to read, and it being kind of like the the textbook DC title in the 2010s, and I think it makes sense to be able to tackle. But I'm hoping they're better, more engaging, and more cohesive Flash arcs and Flash stories, because this is a starting point, I think, is enjoyable enough. But if there is potential for even more, then that's exciting to me.
I'd recommend it if you want to read all the big event books, like as like a checklist thing. But otherwise, I'm not sure I would recommend it. It really kind of doesn't matter, if that makes sense. Doesn't really matter for the Flash, really. Like, the Flash trucks on after this, and he's really the only character. Like even Dawn comes back right away. Like, so like not even the one death that happens that might have mattered doesn't. So, yeah, I would say if you're a completionist, check it out though.
I wouldn't recommend this at all. I hate this book.
Wow.
And I'm mad that every Flash interpretation has to have it now. Sucks.
Tell us how you really feel, Kale.
You guys think it's weird? Last question. You guys think it's weird that DC chose to end the DC universe with a Flash book and not Final Crisis?
Yeah, especially now after having read this.
I don't think
Yeah.
they knew they were ending it with when they had Final Crisis going on.
I don't know.
Well,
They had whole Dick
I don't
Grayson
know.
going on at that point. He was Batman for years after that. Like.
but Sean, is your point that the Final Crisis story would have been told here in its place, or you're just saying there would have been another Final Crisis-esque, like what do you mean?
A book that is called Final Crisis, that
Should be the
features
Final Crisis.
Yeah, that features all the characters. Seems like a pretty good place to wrap it up. A much better place than this, certainly.
Yeah.
And maybe they knew, maybe they didn't know. But I think this book suffers from the fact that it just doesn't make sense that it would even end this way.
I feel like I've heard rumors that something happened in Final Crisis in the midst of like publishing it and everything, that they didn't want to end it there. I don't remember what that rumor is, but I feel like there is a reason that I've heard before.
Well, damn, Kale, you're turning me on. I might have to go learn all about this.
I mean, I wouldn't be
Excuse me?
surprised if it was just the success of Morrison's run on Batman and needing to continue it.
That could be. That could be.
Like, think
yeah,
about all the
I
other
mean,
Morrison stuff we got. We got their take on, Dick Grayson and Damian. We got, Batman Returns, Batman Inc. There was still a lot of stuff.
We got so much of that after the fact of this, anyways. Like, they continued to tell Batman stories the exact same way.
Yeah, but that almost felt like an anomaly.
No, they did it with Green Lantern too.
yeah.
Fair.
But
They picked
yeah,
and chose.
Blackest Night happened between Final Crisis
Yeah.
and this, didn't it?
I think you're right. Yeah.
And Brightest Day. So that seems like too many giant editorial decisions to know. New 52 always felt like a in case of emergency break glass situation in my eyes. Or something. I don't know what sales were like at the time, but it seemed like a need to capitalize on social media, on buzz, on the internet. Decent,
I also think
decent actual marketing around it as well.
I also think it was inspired by the fact that the film universe was coming.
Fair.
And they wanted a clean slate for these characters who, are as steeped in history as Marvel's are, but for some reason, Marvel's characters are. It feels like maybe that's because of the Ultimates, but it feels like it's easier to just say, "Hey, yeah, we're doing movies with Iron Man. Who cares? Read the comics; they're there too." Like they didn't do a ton. Like they elevated Iron Man, but they didn't do a ton to clean up his origin or reboot him or anything like that. It was pretty much just the same dude for the most part.
Yeah.
And that's consistent for all of the Marvel universe in those early years, whereas DC tore everything down and built it back up to make these characters feel palatable.
Yeah, I think so much of what we know as Marvel was invented in the 60s, right? With the exception of like Captain America. Whereas everything in DC started in the 1930s, so, and there have been countless retcons and, resets and multiverses and multiverse shrinkage and blowing up and, aliens invading and then retreating and then gods and then swamp things and then demons. And, I think with DC, their strength has always been iterating on the history. And we see that, even through the different types of Batman movies, right? I think their failure came when they wanted to establish a universe in that iteration of like the Nolan films, right? They wanted to make a house style out of the Nolan films. So they went to Zack Snyder with Man of Steel. But that's not what the DC properties are.
Yeah, we know how that went. So we're preparing on our end for, the Flash for this story rather to be adapted into the Flash movie. We're excited to be on the other side of that and know how that goes. You'll be able to listen to our review of that when we do it. It will be up on this channel or, wherever it is that you listen to us, all podcast hosting platforms will have that review and all of our other content. So if you want to keep up with us, we are on all social platforms at the Comics Pals. If you like this, leave us a like, leave us a follow, a subscription, wherever it is that you take us in. We appreciate you. Watch our show live, our main show, the Comics Pals podcast, every single Saturday at 10:15 a.m. Eastern. Our review show, where we review comic books, every Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern. Don't want to miss any of that stuff. We have a whole backlog of book clubs. I guarantee you will find book club episodes for books that you like. So go check those out. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time, we're the Comic Spouse signing off. Take care, guys.
See you next month.